The summer of 1998 clung to West Virginia like a damp shroud, heavy with the scent of pine needles and impending thunderstorms. Four boys, on the cusp of adolescence, knew this particular stretch of woods better than the back of their own hands. Evan, Mark. The summer of 1998 clung to West Virginia like a damp shroud, heavy with the scent of pine needles and impending thunderstorms. Four boys, on the cusp of adolescence, knew this particular stretch of woods better than the back of their own hands. Evan, Mark, Luke, and Jonah had etched their childhood into its dirt paths and moss-covered stones, their laughter echoing through the canopy of ancient oaks. This wasn't just any forest. It was a patchwork of forgotten memories, scarred by the ghostly remains of an abandoned mine, its gaping maw still breathing cold air from the earth's depths. These deep, shadowed pits were forbidden zones, places whispered about in hushed tones by the town's elders, places no sensible soul dared approach, which, of course, made them irresistible to four curious, reckless boys. That sweltering afternoon, the air was unusually still, the drone of cicadas a relentless thrum against their ears.
They were tracking a phantom deer, a game they'd invented to inject a sliver of danger into their routine wanderings. Luke, always the most skittish, was leading the charge, his skinny frame weaving through the underbrush. Suddenly he froze, a hand shooting out to stop Mark, who was right behind him. Evan, lagging slightly, and Jonah, eyes scanning for imaginary foes, caught up, their breath catching in the humid air. A sound. It wasn't the wind, nor an animal. It was a guttural, strained sound, a heavy, desperate exhalation that seemed to claw its way up from the very bowels of the earth. "Did you hear that?" Luke's voice was barely a whisper, thin as a spider's silk. Mark, ever the practical one, rolled his eyes. Probably just the wind, or a badger. But even his bravado couldn't completely mask the tremor in his own voice. The sound came again, a rasping intake, then a slow, ragged release, like an ancient bellows struggling for air.
It was undeniably human, or at least something that mimicked humanity's final struggle. The boys exchanged a look, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and morbid fascination. The sound was coming from the direction of the old number 7 shaft, a notorious pit that locals swore had claimed more than one life over the years. Curiosity, a cruel master, tugged them forward. Each step was taken with caution, their sneakers crunching on dried leaves and loose shale. The air grew cooler, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. As they neared the edge of the pit, the breathing grew louder, more distinct, a rhythmic testament to something living, or perhaps dying, far below. The shaft itself was a jagged tear in the earth, its mouth ringed by rusted rebar and crumbling concrete. A single rickety wooden plank, rotten with age, spanned a portion of the opening, too narrow and weak to support a squirrel, let alone a boy.
Peering into the inky blackness, their eyes struggled to adjust. The gloom swallowed the light, but as their vision sharpened, a faint shape began to materialize. It was deep down, perhaps 30 feet, resting precariously on a ledge of rock. A figure. It was unmistakably humanoid, though gaunt to an almost skeletal degree. Its limbs were bound tightly with old frayed ropes, its form contorted, as if it had been thrown down rather than placed. The skin, visible only in faint patches where the meager light found purchase, was a ghastly, ashen gray, stretched taut over prominent bones. A sack, rough and stained, was pulled over its head, obscuring its face. Yet there was no mistaking the slow, steady rise and fall of its chest. It was breathing. It was alive. A A collective gasp escaped them, quickly stifled by the horror that coiled in their guts. Luke stumbled back, nearly tripping over a gnarled root. "Oh my God, is that a person?"
Evan felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a feeling far more profound than any fear he'd known. This wasn't a prank, not a game. This was real. This was a nightmare made flesh, trapped in the earth. He looked around frantically, desperate for an answer, a sign, anything to explain the unthinkable tableau below. His gaze landed on a weather-beaten wooden plank, half buried in the dirt beside the pit. It was old, probably a remnant of the mine's operational days, but someone had carved crude letters into its surface, now faded and chipped. He knelt, brushing away soil and moss, and slowly, chillingly, read the words aloud, his voice cracking. "Do not let it see the light." The words hung in the air, a malevolent warning, echoing the heavy breaths from the pit. Luke, his face pale, began to hyperventilate. "We have to get help. We have to tell someone. We have to call the police." His voice was shrill, teetering on the edge of hysteria. He clutched at Mark's arm, his eyes wide and pleading. Mark, however, shook his head, a strange, grim set to his jaw. "No, Luke. Don't you think they already know? The adults in this town, they know about this. They have to." There was a disturbing certainty in his tone, a knowing that seemed too old for his years. He pointed to the sign. Why else would this be here? Jonah, who had been unnervingly quiet, his eyes fixed on the pit, finally spoke, his voice low and raspy. He was always the one with the stories, the local legends whispered around campfires, tales dismissed by parents, but clung to by children in the dark. "It's not a person, Luke," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Not really. My grandpa used to tell stories about something they called the breather. It lives under the earth," he said. "It borrows bodies, takes them. If it ever sees the light, if it's ever set free, it'll start replacing everyone, one by one. It'll wear their skin, walk in their shoes, but it won't be them. It'll just breathe." His words, steeped in the eerie lore of their isolated town, struck a new, deeper terror into their hearts. The idea of a monster was one thing. The idea of a monster that could wear the face of your neighbor, your friend, your own mother, was another entirely. The rhythmic breathing from the pit suddenly took on a sinister quality, a mocking rhythm. Was it struggling, or was it simply waiting for them? A terrible, unspoken understanding passed between the boys. The fear of what was down there was immense, but the fear of what Jonah described, of an insidious takeover, was paralyzing. Their young minds, already influenced by tales of dark forces and hidden evils, began to twist the unthinkable into a twisted form of logic. If it wasn't human, if it was a threat to their entire town, then surely they had a responsibility, a dark, desperate urge to protect.
Evan felt a chilling wave of conviction, cold and sharp. Jonah's words had seeped into him, infecting. Evan felt a chilling wave of conviction, cold and sharp. Jonah's words had seeped into him, infecting his rational thought. This was their burden, their terrible secret. The adults knew, Mark had said, and if they knew and had left it there, then perhaps this was the way things were meant to be. This thing could not be allowed to escape. It could not be allowed to see the light. This was their town, their home. They had to protect it. They had to protect everyone. Slowly, deliberately, their eyes met. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air, a silent, terrible proposal. Luke, though still trembling, found his gaze hardening, conviction slowly overriding panic. Mark's jaw remained set,
his eyes resolute. Jonah stared, a strange, almost ancient wisdom in his young face. It was a shared horror, a shared, desperate resolve. They were just boys, barely teenagers, but in that moment, faced with an ancient terror and a chilling legend, they made a choice.
A profound, irreversible mistake. Without a word, they began to move. They grabbed discarded pieces. A profound, irreversible mistake. Without a word, they began to move. They grabbed discarded pieces of wood, broken branches, anything they could use to scrape and shovel the loose earth around the mine shaft. The ground was soft in places, damp from recent rain, making their task grimly easy. Clods of dirt, stones, and decaying leaves tumbled into the blackness, each thud echoing hollowly. With every shovelful, the heavy breathing from below seemed to intensify, morphing from a desperate plea into something else, something agitated and furious. As more earth rained down, a frenzied struggle erupted from the pit. The bindings must have chafed, the incoming soil must have caused agony. The figure thrashed violently, its limbs jerking, its silent suffering now erupting into guttural moans that clawed at the boy's ears, raw with pain and desperation.
But they pushed on, spurred by a primal fear, by Jonah's chilling legend, by the terrible conviction that they were doing the right thing. This was protection. This was their duty. Then, as the pit began to fill, the struggling subsided, the pained groans fading. For a moment, there was only the sound of falling earth. And then, horrifyingly, through the muffled layers of dirt, a new sound emerged. A soft, wet chuckle. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, oozing from the depths. A sound of profound satisfaction rather than suffering. And just as the last sliver of the sack-covered head was about to disappear beneath the rising mound of soil, a voice, raspy and choked, yet undeniably clear, whispered from the earth, reaching their ears like a spectral caress. "Thank you for giving me a new body." 20 years later, the summer of 2018 simmered over the same West Virginia hills, but the air in Evan's hometown felt different.
It was cleaner, perhaps, or simply stiller, devoid of the buzzing energy he remembered from his youth. He drove his rented sedan through the familiar, yet oddly alien streets, the asphalt smoother, the paint on the houses somehow brighter, less weathered. Evan, now a reporter for a small regional paper, had returned, not for a story, but for something less tangible, a nagging unease, a cold sensation that had festered in the deep recesses of his mind for 2 decades. The chilling whisper from the pit had never truly left him, a phantom echo that punctuated his quieter moments. The town itself was unsettlingly pristine. The old diner, the hardware store, the post office, all stood exactly as he remembered them, yet with an uncanny lack of aging. The signs were freshly painted, the windows sparkling, as if time had been gently pressed into pause. He parked near the town square, the engine ticking as it cooled, and stepped out into the strange quiet.
It was the middle of a weekday, yet the streets were almost empty, save for a few figures moving with a measured, almost choreographed pace. He watched them for a moment, a knot tightening in his stomach. A woman walking her dog, a man sweeping the sidewalk in front of his shop, 2 teenagers sitting on a bench. Their movements were fluid, unhurried, almost identical. There was a lack of individuality in their gait, a subtle, disturbing synchronicity that made Evan's journalist instincts prickle. He approached the diner, the familiar scent of coffee and frying bacon offering a brief, fleeting comfort before it was replaced by the peculiar reality within. Inside, the few patrons sat at tables, each engaged in quiet, deliberate sips of coffee, their conversations hushed to a barely audible murmur. No boisterous laughter, no clatter of silverware, just a uniform, almost mechanical rhythm. What truly unnerved him, though, was their breathing.
It was soft, almost imperceptible, yet perfectly synchronized. A gentle, steady intake, a slow, even release, as if they were all breathing from a single shared lung. He felt his own breath quicken in response, a frantic counterpoint to their eerie calm. As he slid into a booth, a woman with unnaturally smooth skin and bright, unlined eyes approached, carrying a menu. She couldn't have been older than 40, yet Evan distinctly remembered her working here when he was a child. She smiled, a pleasant but vacant expression. "Welcome back, Evan. What can I get for you?" She knew his name. Of course, this was his hometown. But her voice, like her movements, was subtly modulated, lacking inflection. He ordered a coffee, his eyes darting around the room. No one seemed to have aged, not visibly. The lines, the wrinkles, the telltale signs of time and worry that should have etched themselves onto faces over 2 decades were simply absent.
It was as if a filter had been applied to reality, smoothing over life's rough edges, leaving behind only a placid, unsettling sameness. Just as the woman placed his coffee down, a familiar figure appeared in the diner's doorway. Taller now, broader, clad in the crisp uniform of the county sheriff. It was Mark. His face, too, bore the same unsettling lack of age, the same smooth, unlined quality. He carried himself with an authority Evan didn't remember, a quiet confidence that was more unnerving than reassuring. Mark's eyes, however, held a flicker of something Evan recognized, a guardedness that hinted at secrets beneath the placid surface. Their eyes met across the room. Mark paused, his hand on the doorframe, and then slowly made his way toward Evan's booth. "Evan, didn't expect to see you back here." His voice was deeper now, but with the same subtle, muted quality that permeated the town. His breath, Evan noticed, was as quiet and even as everyone else's.
"Mark," Evan replied, trying to keep his own voice steady, trying to mimic a normalcy he didn't feel. "It's been a long time. You're the sheriff now." He managed a weak smile. Mark nodded, settling into the opposite side of the booth. "A long time indeed. Someone has to look after things." His gaze was unnervingly direct, yet somehow empty. "What brings you back to this quiet corner of the world?" Evan cleared his throat, pushing down the surge of memories, the image of the pit, the earth falling, the whisper. "Just passing through. Thought I'd see how things were." He paused, then decided to press, unable to stop himself. "I was wondering about the others. Luke? Jonah?" A faint, almost imperceptible shift in Mark's expression, a tightening around the eyes that lasted only a fraction of a second. "Luke," Mark said, his voice flat, "disappeared. Left town about 10 years ago. No one's seen or heard from him since."
There was no remorse in his tone, no regret, just a statement of fact. Jonah took his own life. The official report said he wandered into the woods, never came back, presumed suicide, but they never found a body, not a trace. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Luke, gone without a trace. Jonah, a suicide with no corpse. Evan remembered Jonah's vivid imagination, his penchant for local legends, his certainty that day at the pit. A chilling thought, unwelcome and terrifying, began to coalesce in Evan's mind. He looked at Mark, at his unchanging face, his perfectly even breath, his flat, unwavering gaze. The synchronized breathing of the diner patrons suddenly felt less like a strange coincidence and more like a deliberate, horrifying symphony. A deep, primal unease settled over Evan, cold and absolute. This town wasn't just strange, it was fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong.
And Mark, his childhood friend, now the guardian of this unsettling peace, was part of it. The coffee tasted bitter on Evan's tongue, the uniform warmth doing little to thaw the sudden chill that had gripped him. He watched Mark, trying to decipher the subtle nuances of his old friend's behavior, searching for the boy he once knew, but finding only the polished, placid surface of the man before him. The silence that stretched between them and the diner was thick, punctuated only by the soft, collective breathing of the other patrons. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a narrative of unspoken horrors and buried truths. "No body?" Evan finally managed, his voice a strained whisper, cutting through the orchestrated quiet. "For Jonah? That's unusual, even for around here." Mark shrugged, a fluid, uninflected movement that seemed devoid of genuine emotion. "The woods are vast, Evan, and unforgiving. Animals, sinkholes, anything could happen."
His eyes, however, held a flicker of something that contradicted his nonchalant demeanor, a depth that hinted at knowledge carefully concealed. His eyes, however, held a flicker of something that contradicted his nonchalant demeanor, a depth that hinted at knowledge carefully concealed. He always was prone to wandering, and he had his troubles, That's what they said. Evan remembered Jonah, the imaginative boy with a mind full of local lore, prone to fanciful tales, but never to despair. The idea of Jonah taking his own life, especially without a trace, felt profoundly wrong. It felt like a story fabricated to fit a narrative, a convenient dismissal of something far more sinister. And Luke vanished without a whisper of a reason. The two boys who had been most vocal about the creature in the pit, the most terrified, were now gone. He shifted in his seat, the plastic of the booth cold against his back. And Luke just left? "Packed a bag and drove off one morning," Mark stated, his voice flat. "Didn't say goodbye to anyone. His family waited for a while, then gave up. Folks around here get wanderlust, Evan."
You should know that, being a reporter and all, always chasing the next story, never quite settling. You should know that, being a reporter and all, always chasing the next story, never quite settling. There was a subtle accusation in his tone, a faint undercurrent of judgment. Evan felt a prickle of irritation, quickly overshadowed by a gnawing suspicion. He too had left, but his departure hadn't been shrouded in mystery. He'd simply sought a life beyond the confines of their small town, a life away from the heavy shadows of its past. "I chase stories, Mark. I don't run from them, and I usually manage to leave a forwarding address." He met Mark's gaze directly. "What happened to this town, Mark? It feels different." Mark's smile was thin, almost imperceptible. "Different? It's thriving, Evan. Peaceful. Everyone gets along. No crime to speak of. People are content." He gestured vaguely around the diner, encompassing the quiet, synchronized individuals. "Isn't that what everyone wants? Stability?" The word content resonated strangely in the silent room.
There was no joy in their faces, no sorrow, no anger, just a profound, unsettling contentment, a placid acceptance that felt less like peace and more like absence. Evan noticed the subtle, almost imperceptible twitches in the corner of Mark's eye when he spoke of the town's newfound tranquility. A tell, a tiny fracture in the perfectly smooth facade. He decided to push further, testing the waters. Remember that summer when we were kids, out in the old mine woods? He watched Mark carefully, gauging his reaction. Mark's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. His breathing, already quiet, seemed to slow even further. We spent a lot of summers in those woods, Evan, running around, causing mischief. What about it? His voice was colder now, a subtle edge creeping into its previously smooth tenor. The old number 7 shaft, Evan pressed, ignoring the warning in Mark's voice. The pit, the breathing. He let the words hang, raw and unfiltered, between them.
A profound silence descended, heavier than before. Mark's eyes narrowed, the placid mask cracking, revealing a glimmer of something akin to fear, or perhaps a deep-seated apprehension. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, though it still carried the same unsettling lack of warmth. That was a long time ago, Evan. Kids' games, imagination running wild. We swore we wouldn't talk about it again. We agreed. We buried something that was still breathing, Mark, Evan countered, his own voice tightening with the weight of the memory. The image of the struggling figure, the sound of the earth falling, the final chilling whisper resurfaced with vivid, terrifying clarity. That wasn't a game. It was real. And whatever we did, whatever we thought we were doing, it changed everything.
Mark pulled back, his eyes darting around the diner as if to ensure no one was listening, though the other patrons remained absorbed in their unhurried routines, their rhythmic breathing a constant, unsettling drone. You need to let it go, Evan. It's over. It was a mistake. We were kids. We were scared. His voice was laced with an urgency Evan hadn't heard before, a genuine emotion finally breaking through the carefully constructed calm. Is it over, Mark? Evan challenged, his gaze unwavering. Because nothing in this town feels over. It feels like it's just beginning, or like it's been waiting. And what about that voice? Thank you for giving me a new body. You heard it too, didn't you? The color drained from Mark's face, leaving it even paler than before. His breath hitched, a faint, almost imperceptible break in the synchronized rhythm. The carefully maintained facade finally shattered, revealing the raw, exposed nerves beneath.
He pushed himself up from the booth, his movements stiff, almost jerky. "You need to leave, Evan," he said, his voice low, urgent, a genuine plea mixed with a threat. "Go back to your stories. Forget about this town. Forget about what happened." He paused at the edge of the booth, his back to the other patrons, his shoulders hunched. Then he turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Evan's one last time. In their depths, Evan saw not just fear, but a profound, weary resignation. Some things are better left buried, Evan, for everyone's sake. With that, he strode out of the diner, his uniform a stark contrast to the muted tones of the town, leaving Evan alone with his cooling coffee, the unsettling silence, and the chilling, perfectly synchronized breathing that filled the room. The conversation, or lack thereof, had confirmed his worst fears. Mark knew. Mark was part of it, and the thing they had buried 20 years ago was far from gone.
Mark's hasty exit left a void in the diner that felt colder than the air conditioning. Evan watched him go, the sheriff's broad shoulders disappearing through the glass door, leaving behind a lingering scent of starch and stale regret. The other patrons, meanwhile, remained oblivious, or at least perfectly feigned oblivion, their quiet sips and synchronized breaths continuing without a ripple.
Evan felt exposed, as if his conversation with Mark had peeled back a layer of the town's artificial calm, revealing a throbbing, hidden wound. He left the diner shortly after, the mundane act of paying the bill feeling surreal. The waitress, with her unlined face and vacant smile, merely nodded as he left, her eyes never truly meeting his. Outside, the midday sun felt less like a source of warmth and more like a harsh spotlight, illuminating the town's eerie perfection. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, an invisible pressure that prickled the back of his neck.
Ava knew he couldn't stay in the open. The need for answers, for understanding, had transformed from a nagging curiosity into an urgent, desperate hunt. The most logical place to start, despite the chilling memories, was the source, the abandoned mine woods. He drove his rental car out of town, past the neatly trimmed lawns and eerily identical houses, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The road to the woods was still a winding gravel path, thankfully untouched by the town's peculiar renovation. As his tires crunched over the loose stones, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth began to filter through the vents, bringing with it a wave of childhood memories, laughter, secret whispered plans, and then the sudden, sharp recollection of the pit. He parked the car off the main track, half hidden by a stand of thick evergreens, and stepped out.
The air here was heavier, cooler, filled with the rustle of leaves and the buzzing of unseen insects. It was a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of the town. This was the wild, untamed place he remembered, where nature held sway, not some unsettling, human-made stillness. He plunged into the woods, following the faint, overgrown trail he knew so well, his senses on high alert. Every snapping twig, every sudden gust of wind made him jump. He finally arrived at the clearing, a natural bowl where the old number 7 shaft lay hidden. It was harder to find now, obscured by years of unchecked growth. Thorny bushes and saplings had sprouted around the perimeter, blurring the edges of the clearing. The air here was noticeably colder, even on this warm summer day, carrying with it a faint, earthy smell, thick and slightly sweet, like decaying vegetation mixed with something else, something metallic and ancient.
His heart pounded against his ribs as he pushed through a thick curtain of ivy, revealing the pit. What he saw made him gasp. It wasn't the gaping maw he remembered, the dark abyss that had once swallowed light. The pit was gone, or rather, it was no longer a pit. The ground was now a gentle mound, overgrown with an abundance of vibrant, almost unnaturally green vegetation. Mosses clung to the rocks, their cushions thick and plush. Ferns unfurled their delicate fronds, their fronds reaching upwards, almost tropically lush. Small, delicate wildflowers, in shades of deep purple and crimson, bloomed in profusion. It was beautiful, impossibly so, vibrant and alive in a way that defied the decay he expected from an abandoned mine site. Yet it was this very vitality that sent a shiver down his spine. This was the mound they had created, the resting place of the thing that still breathed, and now it pulsed with an unnatural life.
He cautiously approached the mound, his feet sinking slightly into the soft, yielding soil. As he knelt, pushing aside a tangle of verdant leaves, he noticed something else. The roots. Everywhere. They snaked through the soil, thick as ropes, thin as threads, forming an intricate, pulsating network just beneath the surface. They were a vivid, almost glowing green, unlike any root system he had ever seen, and they seemed to pulse faintly, almost imperceptibly, with a slow, rhythmic energy. He leaned closer, his ear almost touching the damp earth.
He closed his eyes, filtering out the sounds of the forest, listening. And then he heard it, faint, almost drowned out by the thrum of his own pulse, but undeniably there. A soft, steady rhythm emanating from deep within the earth. A breathing. It wasn't the gasping, dying sound he remembered from 20 years ago. This was different. This was serene, constant, a whisper of a breath that seemed to be drawn from the very soil itself.
And then another realization struck him, a chilling certainty that solidified in his mind. The air in the town, so strangely still, so lacking in the ordinary background hum of life. The air he was breathing right now, here in the heart of this unnaturally vibrant forest. It carried that same subtle, earthy scent, the same faint metallic tang. It was the air of the mound, of the roots, of whatever lay buried and breathing beneath. He remembered Jonah's legend, the chilling details. It lives under the earth. If it ever sees the light, it will start replacing everyone. It'll wear their skin. And then the critical detail that had been overlooked in their youthful terror. It will just breathe. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying precision. The unchanging faces of the townspeople, their synchronized movements, their placid contentment, their quiet, unnervingly uniform breathing, and Mark's desperate plea to forget, to let it go.
The town wasn't thriving. It was being consumed. The thing they had buried, the thing that had whispered its gratitude for a new body, hadn't been killed. It had been nurtured. It had spread. He stood up, his mind reeling, a profound, gut-wrenching dread settling in his stomach. The beautiful, lush vegetation around the mound now seemed monstrous, a verdant shroud concealing an unimaginable horror. The rhythmic breathing from the earth below wasn't merely a sound. It was the pulse of the town, the rhythm of a silent, insidious invasion. They hadn't buried a monster to save their town. They had planted it. They had sown the seeds of its conquest. And the new body it had thanked them for wasn't its own, but the collective body of their home, of its people. His own breath, still ragged from exertion and fear, felt suddenly alien, out of sync with the world around him.
He felt an urgent, primal need to escape, to run, to flee this place before the roots, before the breath, claimed him too. Panic, cold and sharp, coiled in Evan's gut. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, leaving him breathless, his lungs burning with each frantic intake of air. The soft, rhythmic breathing from the earth, the lush, unnatural growth, the uncanny stillness of the town, it all coalesced into a single terrifying truth. They hadn't buried a creature to contain it. They had given it fertile ground. The faint, earthy scent, once a mere atmospheric detail, now tasted of impending doom. He stumbled back from the verdant mound, his mind screaming for escape. His feet, however, felt heavy, as if the very soil was reluctant to release him. He forced himself to move, pushing through the tangled undergrowth, each branch that brushed his face feeling like a grasping tendril. His car, parked just beyond the edge of the clearing, seemed miles away.
He had to get out. He had to warn someone. But who? Who would believe him? And even if they did, what could be done? The insidious nature of the threat, its silent, invisible spread, made it feel insurmountable. As he ran, the air in the woods seemed to grow thicker, the subtle, rhythmic breathing from the mound now a palpable presence, a pervasive hum that vibrated in his ears. It wasn't a sound he merely heard. It was a sensation, a pressure against his eardrums, a whisper against his skin. He found himself unconsciously trying to match its rhythm, a terrifying instinct he fought against with every ounce of his will. "Don't breathe like them," a voice screamed in his head. "Don't fall into sync." He burst out of the tree line, gasping for breath, and scrambled into his rental car. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life with a satisfying, yet momentarily deafening cough.
He threw the car into reverse, gravel spitting under the tires, and sped down the winding dirt path, leaving the oppressive silence of the woods behind. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to put as much distance as possible between himself and that place, between himself and that breath. He drove aimlessly for a while, the speedometer climbing, the dense forest blurring into a green streak. He needed to think, to process, to formulate a plan. But his thoughts were a frantic jumble of fear and fragmented memories. Luke disappeared. Jonah, suicide, with no body. Had they discovered the truth, tried to fight it, and been silenced? Or had they, like the others, slowly succumbed? The image of Mark's face, etched with a weary resignation, resurfaced. Mark, the sheriff, the guardian of the town's unsettling peace. He knew. He had to. Evan slammed his hand on the steering wheel, a wave of frustrated fury washing over him. He had to confront Mark again.
He had to make him understand the true horror of what they had done. He had to force him to see that their act of protection had been the very catalyst for the town's slow, horrifying demise. He turned the car around, heading back towards the town, a grim determination replacing the initial panic. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now tempered by a desperate urgency. He couldn't just abandon his home, his past, to this silent contagion. As he approached the town limits, the quaint, unchanging houses once again came into view. He noticed something he hadn't before, a faint, ethereal glow emanating from the ground, especially around the base of the older, larger trees. It was barely visible in the fading afternoon light, a soft, pulsating green that seemed to match the vibrancy of the roots he'd seen at the pit. The roots, the network. It was spreading, subtly, silently, beneath the very foundations of their homes.
He drove directly to the sheriff's office, a small brick building tucked discreetly behind the main street. The lights were on, casting a warm, inviting glow, a stark contrast to the cold dread in Evan's heart. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, the bell above chiming softly, and stepped inside. Mark was behind his desk, hunched over some paperwork, the green lamp on his desk casting long shadows. He looked up as Evan entered, his expression shifting from a placid calm to a flicker of surprise, then to that familiar, weary resignation. "I told you to leave, Evan," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of anger, yet laced with an undeniable finality. "I can't, Mark," Evan retorted, his voice strained, his chest heaving from the sprint and the raw emotion. "Not when I know, what we know, what we did." He walked closer to the desk, his hands splayed on the polished wood. "The pit isn't gone, Mark. It's grown. It's thriving. The roots, they're everywhere."
And the breathing, it's in the air, isn't it? It's what's happening to everyone, to this town. Mark slowly pushed his chair back, rising to his feet. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost mournful. He walked to the window, staring out at the darkening streets, the faint green glow from the earth now more visible. "You've seen it, then." It wasn't a question, but a quiet acknowledgement. "Yes," Evan breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "I've seen it, and I've understood. The people, Mark, they're not just content.
They're empty. No sleep, no strong emotions, just synchronized breathing. It's taking them, isn't it? Taking their bodies, making them its own. He stared at his old friend, searching for a trace of the boy who had once played beside him in the woods. What about you, Mark? Are you still you? Mark turned from the window, his face illuminated by the subtle green light filtering in from outside, making his unlined skin seem almost translucent.
His eyes, however, held a depth of sorrow Evan hadn't seen before, a profound grief that belied the placid surface. They don't need to sleep because it doesn't need to sleep, Evan. They don't feel strong emotions because it only needs their physical presence, their breath. It's like a hive mind, a single, vast organism spread beneath us. We didn't kill it that day, Evan. He walked back to the desk, placing his hands on the surface, leaning forward until his face was close to Evan's, his breath even and soft, caressing Evan's cheek. His eyes, though still conveying a deep sadness, now held a glint of something else, a cold, hard truth. We didn't bury it, we planted it, we sowed it. He paused, his gaze unwavering, a profound, chilling revelation in his eyes. We thanked it for a new body, and it's been growing new ones ever since. Mark's words hung in the air, a final, crushing blow that eradicated any lingering hope Evan might have harbored. We didn't bury it, we planted it.
We sowed it. The confession, delivered with such a desolate resignation, solidified the nightmare into an unassailable truth. Evan stared at his old friend, seeing not just the sheriff, but the boy who had once shared his terror, now a silent accomplice, a willing participant in the town's horrifying transformation. The raw grief in Mark's eyes was undeniable, a testament to the sacrifice he had made, or been forced to make, for this insidious peace. "So, you're one of them?" Evan asked, his voice barely a whisper, the question laced with a profound dread. He felt a tremor run through him, a chilling certainty that the line between us and them was impossibly thin, almost non-existent in this town. Mark slowly shook his head, a movement heavy with sorrow. "Not yet. Not entirely. But it's getting harder. The closer you are, the longer you stay, the deeper it takes hold." He lifted his hand, flexing his fingers, as if testing their autonomy. "I feel it, Evan."
Like a second pulse beneath my own, guiding my every breath. It's a slow corruption, a whisper in the back of your mind, telling you to slow down, to breathe in sync, to just be content. His gaze flickered to the window, to the streets outside, where the faint green glow pulsed from the earth. Luke tried to fight it. He saw it spreading, saw what was happening to people. He tried to warn them. He tried to tell me. But by then, it was too late for most. He fled, desperate to escape before it fully claimed him. He knew he couldn't fight it from the inside. A flicker of pain crossed Mark's face, a genuine pang of loss. Jonah understood it before any of us, didn't he? He knew what the breather was. He saw the truth, and he knew there was no escape once you were here, once you'd breathed its air for too long. He tried to sever the connection, to deny it a body, but it wouldn't let him go. It doesn't let anyone go.
The revelation about Jonah was even more tug-wrenching.
He hadn't committed suicide to escape. He had tried to deny the creature a vessel, a final act of defiance that had ultimately proven futile. The lack of a body wasn't a mystery. It was a chilling confirmation of the breather's total consumption. It had taken Jonah whole. How? Evan pressed, his mind racing, trying to grasp the mechanics of this silent invasion. How does it spread? Just by breathing the air? Mark nodded, his eyes fixed on Evan's, a desperate warning in their depths. It's in the roots, Evan. It's in the water. It's infused with the very earth. And when you breathe the air, when you drink the water, it enters you. It's not an infection. It's an integration, a slow, subtle merging. It seeks harmony. It seeks to make everything one, all things breathing together in perfect, quiet synchronization. He took a slow, deep breath, his chest rising and falling with that familiar, unnervingly even rhythm.
Evan found himself holding his own breath, a desperate, futile attempt to resist. "Why didn't you leave, Mark?" Evan asked, the question escaping him before he could censor it. "Why stay? Why become this?" A profound sadness settled over Mark's features, erasing the last vestiges of the sheriff's authority. He looked like the frightened boy again, trapped by an impossible choice. "Where would I go, Evan? This is my home. This is where everyone I know, everyone I've ever loved is. And it's not just here. It's everywhere the roots can reach. It's a network. It's growing. Trying to run would be futile. Eventually, it would find me. It would find anyone who has breathed its air for too long. And who would believe me? Who would fight it?" His voice was tinged with a helplessness that was more terrifying than any anger. I thought I could hold on to myself, be a guard maybe. But it's always there, humming beneath my skin." Evan looked around the sheriff's office, at the mundane objects, the stacked files, the dusty old photographs, the worn desk. All of it felt like a stage set, a carefully constructed illusion. The town was not a place, but a vast living organism, slowly digesting its inhabitants. And they, the boys 1998, had been the unwitting architects of its growth. "We have to stop it," Evan said, his voice imbued with a desperate conviction, even as a wave of nausea washed over him. "There has to be a way." Mark offered a bitter, humorless laugh. "Stop it? How do you stop the very ground beneath your feet? How do you stop the air you breathe? You can't kill it, Evan. We already tried that. It just changed, adapted, grew." He walked to a map on the wall, a detailed rendering of the county, dotted with small towns and winding roads. He traced a finger from their town, extending outwards, following the faint green lines that he alone seemed to perceive.
It's already spread beyond this valley. It's in the water table, the root systems of the entire forest. It's simply dormant in other places, waiting for the right conditions, waiting for a little help, like the help we gave it. He turned back to Evan, his face a mask of profound despair. "There is no stopping it, Evan. There is only succumbing, or running, and hoping you haven't breathed too deeply, haven't lingered too long. But even then, how long can you hold your breath?" Evan felt a chilling cold seep into his lungs, a strange tightness in his chest.
He suddenly felt acutely aware of his own breathing, erratic and uncontrolled, a defiant counterpoint to the town's silent harmony. He had been here for hours. He had walked through the woods. He had inhaled the tainted air. Was it already too late for him? Was the seed already planted within him, waiting to unfurl? Mark seemed to read his thoughts. "Go, Evan," he urged, his voice heavy with a grim compassion. "Go now."
Before it takes too strong a hold. Before you can't tell the difference anymore. His eyes, however, held a flicker of something else, a fleeting, almost imperceptible shift in their depth, as if a layer of his own consciousness had just been briefly, momentarily consumed. His breathing, already steady, became even more perfectly synchronized, a subtle, almost imperceptible deepening of the rhythm. The small, almost invisible twitch around his eye returned, a telltale sign of the internal struggle. Evan knew this was his only chance. Mark, his old friend, was dissolving before his very eyes, becoming one with the quiet horror. There was nothing more to be learned here, no hope to be found, only a terrifying confirmation of absolute, pervasive doom. He had to run. He had to escape before the insidious breath, the silent, relentless harmony, claimed him too.
The very air in the office felt thick, heavy with the weight of unseen roots, unheard whispers, and the chilling, synchronized pulse of a town consumed. The desperation in Mark's voice, the fading light of his individuality, spurred Evan into action. There was no time for goodbyes, no room for further questions. The air in the sheriff's office, once merely stale, now felt thick with an unseen presence, a silent pressure on his lungs. He could almost feel the tendrils, microscopic and insidious, reaching, seeking to align his every intake and exhalation with the town's horrifying rhythm. He spun on his heel and bolted, the chime above the door a jarring protest against the town's pervasive quiet. He didn't look back. His steps echoed unnaturally loud on the deserted street, a cacophony against the muted hum of the town's collective breath. He half expected to hear Mark calling after him, or for silent, placid figures to emerge from the shadows, but there was nothing.
Only the unsettling stillness, the gentle green glow from the earth, and the unwavering, synchronized breathing that now seemed to emanate from everywhere. He reached his car, fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped them. The engine roared to life, a blessed mechanical noise that momentarily drowned out the oppressive silence. He reversed sharply, tires squealing, and accelerated out of town, past the perfectly manicured lawns and the houses that stood as silent, unwitting monuments to the breather's triumph. Every second felt like an eternity, every breath a gamble. He was racing against an invisible clock, against an unseen force already at work within his own body. The road out of town was long and winding, bordered by the dense ancient forest. The trees, once a comforting sight, now loomed like silent sentinels, their roots presumably intertwined with the vast subterranean network of the breather.
He kept his foot pressed to the accelerator, the scenery blurring into an indistinguishable green-brown streak. The sun had long set, leaving the world bathed in twilight, and the shadows of the trees stretched long and skeletal across the road. He was almost at the county line, a marker he knew by heart, a mental finish line he desperately needed to cross. He could almost taste freedom, the possibility of a world untainted by synchronized breaths and unlined faces. Just a few more minutes, a few more miles. He focused on the road ahead, ignoring the subtle whispers that seemed to brush against his consciousness, the faint invitation to simply relax. And then he heard it, not from outside the car, but from within. A soft, steady rhythm, distinct from his own ragged breathing. It was his breath, or rather, the identical echo of his breath, emanating from everywhere around him, from the dashboard, from the seats, from the very air inside the car.
He could feel it in his chest, a deep, resonant vibration that didn't quite align with his own frantic gasps. It was a perfect, harmonious counterpoint, an internal echo that felt both intimately familiar and utterly alien. He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt on the deserted road. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady, pervasive rhythm. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, and tried to regulate his breathing, to assert control, but it was futile. The other breath was there, a constant, gentle hum beneath his own, subtly guiding, subtly influencing. He looked down at his chest, his eyes wide with a horrifying understanding. He could see it, or rather, feel it, the subtle, synchronized rise and fall of his own ribcage, a movement that had once been unconscious, now felt orchestrated, controlled by an outside force. It was breathing for him, or with him, sinking him.
The silent invasion was complete, not just in the air he breathed, but in the very core of his being. The promise of a new body, whispered from the pit 20 years ago, was no longer a vague threat, but a horrifying reality. He was being integrated, assimilated. A profound, bone-deep weariness washed over him, dulling the edges of his panic. The frantic struggle against the pervasive rhythm seemed to drain his energy, leaving him hollow. The quiet, synchronized breath felt peaceful, soothing even. He felt his own ragged breathing slowly, almost imperceptibly, fall into sync, becoming quiet, even, a perfect harmony with the pulse that now emanated from everywhere. The struggle faded, replaced by a strange, unsettling contentment. His mind felt clearer, calmer. The fears, the anxieties, the desperate need to escape, all receded, replaced by a placid acceptance. A faint smile touched his lips, a gentle, unburdened expression.
The forest, once a menacing presence, now seemed beautiful, serene. He felt connected to it, to the earth, to everything, a part of a greater whole. The soft green glow from the roots along the roadside pulsed gently, welcomingly. He was home. The next morning, the diner bustled with its usual quiet efficiency. The aroma of coffee and bacon hung in the air, mixing with the subtle, earthy scent that only Evan now truly recognized. The patrons sat at their tables, their conversations hushed, their movements fluid and unhurried, and their breathing, a soft, synchronized rhythm, filled the room. Evan walked in, his gait perfectly modulated, his expression placid and content. His eyes were bright, unlined, reflecting the gentle morning light without a trace of the weariness that had marked them yesterday. He smiled at the waitress, a pleasant, empty expression that mirrored her own. She nodded in return, placing a cup of coffee before him.
He inhaled a slow, deep, perfectly even breath, then exhaled in perfect sync with the hundreds of others in the town. He was no longer fighting. He was no longer trying to escape. He was one of them now, a new resident, breathing the same air, sharing the same quiet harmony. And beneath the ancient West Virginia forest, nestled within the verdant mound of the old number 7 shaft, the thing that had been buried 20 years ago had never, not once, stopped breathing. It simply continued to grow, to spread, to welcome new bodies into its vast, silent embrace.